let's talk about Waverley by Sir Walter Scott, which was his first novel. He became known anonymously as the author of the Waverley novels, named after this, so it made his reputation in part as a novelist. It was written in 1814, or published around then, but it is itself a historical romance. It's set, depending on which edition you have, 40 or 60 years before the publication. It's set in 1745 and 1746 as part of what's known as the 45, the Jacobite Rebellion led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, aiding the French in their war against the British and seeking to restore the Stuarts to the throne of Britain and Ireland. The plot is, so it's a classic, it's a historical fiction as well within the context of already being a classic, and the story is that a young English gentleman who is of a family historically sympathetic to the Jacobites gets caught up in the rebellion. He's a soldier, he's an English or British soldier for the Hanoverians, the rulers, the ruling house, and still their descendants rule Britain today. And he gets caught up via one means or another with the Jacobite Rebellion and joins them. There are two women that he meets and has some sort of interest in, Rose Bradwardine and Flora MacIver. There's his friend Flora MacIver's brother, who is a chieftain of a large kind of Highland influence. There's a large cast of other characters as well. I mean, those are actually Fergus MacIver, Flora MacIver, Edward and Rose. And Rose's father, the Baron Bradwardine, are about the most important characters on screen. You also get Edward's father, his uncle and his aunt, who are also important. And a whole cast of other minor, lesser characters. It's... The basic summary is, I enjoyed this. I thought the first volume, or just over that, was really good. This is technically, I think it was originally in 2 volumes, roughly, there. The first volume, or volume and a bit, is really, really very good. Very good. And then it sort of falls apart a bit as far as plot goes. That's not atypical for long 18th century and 19th century novels. You find that all the way from the first long-form novels of your Sterns and your Defoes and your Richardsons and your Fieldings, all the way through to Dickens and Thackeray, where sometimes there's just the plot disappears. Sometimes it literally disappears. There's no story for ages and chapters. That's not so much the problem here, but sometimes the idea that there's a structure to plot disappears. And people, I talked about this with my friend Abby on the most recent Portal to Fantasy. People think because Austen's structure is so good, they don't get why other fiction of the same rough period, and Scott and Austen were very close contemporaries, they don't get why other fiction of the period really struggles with structure. And it's just that wasn't something which was being edited in. It wasn't an emphasis, it wasn't a focus. And obviously that ages badly for us, where we are used to many novels being tighter and having some sense of like, these are the events that lead to a conclusion. Here in the back half there is a degree of convenience, a number of coincidences, things rattling along. Oh, here's a quick explanation, by the way, of this mystery earlier you might not have worked out. So that doesn't really work. It's still interesting to listen to, or I'll get to that. It's an audiobook I listen to read, to listen to. It's still interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing what happened to our characters. There's some very good scenes in that concluding quarter of the book or whatever. But structurally it doesn't work very well. Scott is a good writer. His style is good. It's pretty clear on the whole. It's actually relatively, though you still get long sentences as you'd expect for the period, he is probably more immediately approachable than some other writers of the period. Not as easy necessarily as Austen, but clean. He's very good at getting character voices right. His character voices are pretty much without exception incredibly clear. You know who you're listening to talk, and you know something of their personality through how they talk. Very good characters. The action, there are 2 battles on screen, the Battle of Preston Pans and the Battle of Clifton or Clifton Moor. So you don't actually, interestingly, you don't get either the later battles of Falkirk or the famous, infamous, tragic or victorious Battle of Culloden, the last pitched battle on the island of Great Britain. You don't get that in this. That might seem like a spoiler, but it's not really. Partly you can even see it from the chapter titles at the start. You get some battles, not others. It covers a particular period in a particular way, and the battles are quite fun. They are not. Edward gets some action, and it's pretty clear and it's pretty exciting. It's not Bernard Cornwell, it's not Joe Abercrombie, it's not whoever else you like for that, but it's good fun. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I think as a classic, it was, in one way, it's just historically important. I chose it because it was historically important. That's why I wanted to listen to it next. And I think it works. It is not as strong as lots of slightly less famous novels, say, but I think it is a worthy entry into the kind of the historical canon. It is interesting, of course, to think that the Waverley novels, most of which aren't connected at all to this, it's just because that was the author's name, his anonymous name, author of the Waverley novels. These books were once pretty much the most read sort of long form novel series, more than Dickens perhaps, or about as much, and they've rather fallen out of favour. And I think from reading a strong example of that, I can see some of why. It's much less obviously upfront, really funny and clever and witty than Dickens. That's not Scott's strength. His strengths are strong character, good description. There's an eccentric authorial voice that sometimes comes up, which you do get in people like Dickens, but I think in Scott it's a bit more jarring. I think the issues of structure probably are fairly pervasive across the Waverley novels, I suspect, having this being a stronger example. And they're long as well. This is Penguin Popular Classics, is about 500 pages of small text. So you're talking about, you could easily get 800-page editions of that with larger text, or 750-page. So they're long, and that is less appealing than, one thing about Austen is her books tend to be shorter. So do some of the Bronte novels. So yeah, I can see why. But I enjoyed it, and with those caveats, with that context, I'd recommend it to you for a fun historical romance with some good action, some decent romance, very good characters. The final point I make, and this is not really directly pertinent to the review, but I listen to classics. I always have a classic as my audiobook, and I listen chiefly to LibriVox audiobooks. And I've had an enormously good experience of that, and the book I'm now listening to, David Copperfield, really good experience. The audiobook of this was very mixed. It had a couple of good readers on it. It was a mixed cast. And I just am appreciative of the other people who put their time in so I could listen to it. But the quality was all over the place, and you can see the risk of it. Nonetheless, that didn't, in the end, I ended up almost getting into this groove where I was like, this is just some person, some lady reading to me. That's nice. And I stopped really worrying about, and there were like loads of weird, funny bits to do with that were, in a funny way, a bonus. But like, I stopped really worrying about it. But it was an experience. I recommend LibriVox, but I would certainly think about, like, I suspect I'd try to stick to single reader experiences from now on, where I know, or for readers I know. Anyway, that's Waverley. If you've read it, or other stories by Walter Scott, I guess his other most famous ones are Ivanhoe and Rob Roy. I'd love to hear what you think about them in the comments. And what are your other favourite classics of that long, well, the 18th and 19th centuries? Again, tell me in the comments. Till next time.